Welcome back to PathMonk Presents. PathMonk is the AI for website conversions. With increasing online competition, over 98% of website visitors don't convert. The ability to successfully show your value proposition and support visitors in their buying journey separates you from the competition online. PathMonk qualifies and converts leads on your website by figuring out where they are in the buying journey and influencing them in key decision moments with relevant micro experiences like case studies, intro videos, and much more. Stay relevant to your visitors and increase conversions by 50% by adding PathMonk to your website in seconds, letting the artificial intelligence do all the work, and increase conversions by 50% while you keep doing marketing as usual. Check us out on pathmonk.com. Welcome back to PathMonk Presents. We're really excited for today's episode. We've got Alistair Hayes from Scalr. Alistair, how you doing today?
Good, Kevin. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for joining the show. So before we dive into anything, I really wanted to give our audience kind of a chance to understand what Scalr is all about and give us a little background about things and also what you're doing as the VP of marketing over there. So why don't you give us a little bit of background in your own words, tell us about Scalr and what it's all about.
Sure. So I'll take a step back because most people are probably not familiar with Scalr or infrastructure as code. But what infrastructure as code is managing all of your servers, databases, anything that you use to build your product, and doing it through like codifying it instead of manually someone going into AWS console and clicking around. The way we do this is we use an open source piece of software called OpenTofu that lets developers write these configuration files and turn them into real infrastructure across the cloud, but really any provider, be it a private cloud, a public cloud, or any type of service. And then what we do is on top of OpenTofu, we build everything that makes it much easier for teams to scale. We add collaboration, we add security, policy enforcement, automation. So developers can not just like move a lot more quickly by being able to codify it and replicate it, but to do it safely in an environment with the right guardrails in place so that when something changes in production, the business isn't impacted in a negative way.
So it sounds like really giving any sort of developers out there the keys and the tools to kind of move more freely and more quickly within the systems that they're working.
Yes, exactly. And in large organizations, it's often giving an internal team the tools to then enable their developers based on their like custom requirements or custom needs. Because obviously, with large organizations, the complexity just keeps ramping up and up.
I see. All right, that's awesome. Thanks for the background. So to go back to Scalr, and of course, we're talking about everything from a marketing and a growth perspective. Maybe you can tell us, who is it that you're exactly serving? Are there specific companies or industries or specific types of people within companies that you're typically working with? And what sort of problems are you helping them solve?
Right. So it's we've got a fairly varied customer base. What's interesting is we have everything from really early startups who are kind of using the next generation of technology to be able to, as a competitive advantage, to be able to move quickly. So they're typically, using infrastructure as code from day one, so they can have a relatively low spend on their DevOps team, but at the same time move really quickly. What we also have is kind of then ranging in size, all the way up to kind of Fortune 10 companies that already have a lot of existing systems all over the place, be it through natural growth, be it through acquisition. And often there's internal teams called platform engineering teams or site reliability engineering teams or DevOps teams that are looking to consolidate things down, make it standardized, make compliance and reporting a lot easier. In some industries like banking or insurance, it's often the case that they work hand in hand with legal to make sure that everything that's logged needs to be logged. All of the privacy data or all of the privacy is respected from customer data, but also internal data, and really building systems that do that automatically. So we're lucky in that there's a natural fit across kind of a company of any size, be it earlier on generally technology companies or later on almost any company of the requisite size and complexity, which gives us an interesting opportunity to reach a number of different personas.
I think it kind of fits within the name, right? You're all about like helping businesses scale, but it seems like you guys can scale depending on whoever you're working with. So I think the name Scalr definitely fits based on the description that you just gave. Yeah. That's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about your audience, because when we were talking before the recording, you were kind of mentioning like sometimes you want to be marketing directly to the developers who might be using something like this, as opposed to maybe someone like within the C-suite or something like that. So maybe you can tell us, like, how does your audience typically find out about you at this moment, and what are some of those top acquisition channels?
Right. So it's almost all organic. So we have pretty simple websites, if you like. But really what we do is we spend most of our time trying to get people into the product. So our company top to bottom is focused on how do we build the best product? How do we make it work for our end users? Which some of the time is like software engineer, some of the time it's DevOps engineer, site reliability engineer, but often the people we're actually appealing to are a management level or a lead, a team lead. So it's someone running the DevOps team or someone running the platform engineering team who might have their own solution currently, but is really looking to like, how do I make this easier? How do I do it a lot more cheaply? And how do I do it super reliably without having to get phone calls at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning because something broke?
Right.
So right now our primary channel is, well, there's two. It's referral and organic. So we're in a somewhat competitive market space. We differentiate in a couple of ways. But really our key differentiation is saying to anyone, there's no gates. You can come use us. We're a usage-based product, so you just pay for what you use. And really just unblock them in their journey to learn about us, try us out, and then start using us and migrate off your either existing solution or often a DIY solution. So they've built a similar system themselves, and just allow them to really explore freely without any gates.
Awesome. Awesome. And to dive a little bit further into what you said about organic being a major channel for you guys, maybe you can give our audience a little bit more detail into what are some of the strategic elements of your organic strategy at the moment?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of ways we look at it kind of from a principle point of view, which I think then like leads on to how we actually implement it. So one is that we like to experiment, we try things out. If they're not working, we don't do them anymore. If they are working, we keep doing them until they're not working. And we really take a measurement lens on everything. So we've made a conscious decision as a business not to invest as much as possible in the product. Well, what that means is marketing is really lean. So with that, one of the principles we generally think of is we want a value exchange with any action we do. So we want to give something to the person consuming it in return for hopefully getting them to find value with our business. And really early on start creating that relationship where we don't ask them to do things that aren't valuable to them and to us. And in that way kind of start coaxing the user to understand that like, oh no, there's a reason for everything. So what that looks like in practical terms is thoughtful blog posts, thoughtful LinkedIn content. We focus a lot on product marketing to be like, here's what we built, here's why we built it. What do you think about that? Is there room for feedback? And really kind of opening up a high quality community as soon as they sign up. So we're somewhat strict on who gets access. We're not trying to achieve any metric for our community that's like, here's the number of users, here's the number of impressions. It's the same with any of our social media. We kind of really try and draw everything back to like, if it's external to our systems, how do we get them to our systems, from our systems, i.e. our website and doc sites, how do we get them to sign up? And really if it's not leading to those actions, we tend not to do it. So we don't have the luxury of having vanity metrics, to be honest, in terms of when we drive it. So yeah, that's basically what we try and do is give high value content or some other value exchange as a method to demonstrate to the potential customer that like, hey, we're serious, we're transparent, we want to help you, and sign up and try.
I think that is kind of refreshing because there's a lot of kind of businesses we speak to all the time that are always talking about, content. The more you have out there, the higher you're going to be ranking in Google, all of these things. How many words can you fit onto a single page and how many keywords can you get involved and things like that. So it sounds nice to know that the content you guys are putting out there is thoughtful, is written in a way for the end users, right? The actual developers that are going to be utilizing it, and yeah, making kind of like a sense of community. Like the people that are utilizing this tool probably all have relatively similar goals and are,
Right.
utilizing systems that could probably be helpful to each other. So yeah, create a community where everyone can kind of help each other. I like that. Moving on to the next question. I wanted to talk about the role that your website plays in terms of client acquisition currently. You were saying that the website isn't anything major, but it looks great and it looks like a pretty well converting website. Maybe you can tell us what role does the website play in terms of client acquisition, and are there any sort of major strengths or weaknesses to the website at the moment?
Yeah. So in terms of client acquisition, like really the focus of it is to try and get people to sign up. In reality, what that looks like is someone gets there in some way, normally not to our homepage, We typically then try and move them either to the homepage or the pricing page. Pricing is currently one of our advantages for a lot of potential customers. Some customers it's not necessarily like usage based, like any pricing model has its pros and cons. But typically from there, it's land on an item, get the information they need, make sure they feel comfortable, and then try and sign up. And that's the primary goal of it. I know previously we were talking about one of our our better selling points, if you like, is our doc site. So it's on the homepage. Same with our API documentation. It's all kind of the same area. And for our persona, that's what really resonates. So then they come in, they'll read a little bit of marketing. Generally, like our average page times aren't super high. They're kind of what you'd expect, but a lot of people aren't getting down. But when they get to docs, you'll find a lot more engagement. And what they do is, they look and they go, okay, this is well thought out. I can understand it. On the API documentation side, which is obviously huge for developers, it's very well done. Ryan and the team do a great job of that. And one of the nice features too, well, that's maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself, but it integrates well with our product so that you can actually generate the calls for your company using non-sensitive data kind of in the document side itself, which really resonates with developers because then they start getting that feeling of like, oh, this is built for people like me. Kind of the same as what we try and do with the website, where it's like we try and minimize fluff, we try and minimize like you don't have to talk to sales. We kind of encourage everyone never to talk to sales, and it's really just about like, hey, this is built for people like you because we are the same people. Like we understand what you want, we understand that we have challenges. We understand that you don't want to be sold something. You want to know if it's going to meet your needs rather than I've got to convince you to use it. And there's lots of different approaches, but we find that leads to a very like low customer acquisition costs, keeps us very, very humble in terms of if we don't have the right solution for them, then they're not shy and just leaving us.
Yeah, it really quickly either qualifies you guys for them or disqualifies you, right? And I can tell you this,
right.
when I was checking out the website and when I went to the documentation section, I quickly knew this is not for me. I am not a developer,
Right.
and I quickly could tell, like, okay, this is not the place for me. But I can totally understand, like, if someone was a developer looking for the tools that you guys provide, they
Right.
click on documentation, they already feel at home. Like, this is the type of stuff I was looking for immediately. Right. So yeah, that's probably like a really quick, okay, we qualify ourselves for what these people are looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Okay. I want to move on to a new section of the conversation where we're going to stop focusing about Scalr and a little bit more about Alistair as the marketing professional, as the VP of growth. And to get started, maybe you can let us know, in terms of websites, kind of a nice segue after just talking about your website, in terms of websites in general, what sort of tips or tools or methods might you have in terms of recommendations that make for a really good converting website?
So I think the piece that stands out to me, and maybe actually I don't think it's controversial, but the piece that stands out to me is like most websites don't have most websites don't have a good understanding of conversion. So and I'm going to get very specific on B2B here, if that's okay, just because that's kind of my world. I don't really operate in the B2C world, but one of the big things we spend actually quite a lot of time and effort on is understanding the concept of your account, i.e., the company the person's from, as well as the user. And I think that's where a lot of the website conversion gets lost, because you've kind of got three streams, right? You've got someone from a new company that's new, first time to the website. Those are the people you're like, these are the people we need to try and convert pretty much in this moment, or maybe coming back, but generally drop-offs are high. Then you've got, okay, it's an existing customer to some degree, whether they're paying or not, and it's someone from that company. And then you've got kind of your actual users, and all three of those are happening all the time to your website, because I don't know about you, but anytime I'm like, I need to log into something, I don't use favorites, I've got way too many bookmarks, I just type in the company name through Google, then log in, right? So I think having a really good understanding of those kind of three cohorts so that you can really understand your conversion. So from our point of view, I'm pretty okay with our conversion right now. Could it be better? Absolutely. But if I look at our kind of overall model in terms of how people get to us, how they sign up, how they activate, how they're retained, the part of I'm at the website to I now sign up is not my highest priority. So I think that's a bit of a win at the moment with the website. But I think that's how I think about things. because I think without that, you can just endlessly change things, and it might put a metric up that's like, well, we increase the number of visitors, which is, net good. That's not a bad thing. You might increase the number of like signups or page clicks, but without understanding kind of who you really care about with the idea of like actual acquisition versus like growth or expansion of existing accounts or just your current user base, it's really hard to make a meaningful impact, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. PathMonk does something similar, where PathMonk identifies where each one of these website visitors are in the buying journey, so we can kind of identify,
Okay.
are they early stage, middle stage, late stage, and
Right.
then being able to interact with those people in a different manner based on who they are, and that's kind of the idea behind PathMonk. So maybe there's an idea there. So moving on, I know that there's a lot of places to kind of go to learn, to get smarter, to stay up to date, but there's a lot of content out there. We're always kind of curious, where do you go to kind of learn and grow and make sure that you're, consuming the type of content that's going to make you a better marketing professional?
Sure. So I I try and vary my sources essentially is my general goal, and then I also um, try and go outside of marketing growth product type material too. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned and information through like analogous types of activities. So I like love, for instance, Lex Friedman's podcast, depending on who's like what the topic is. He used to be a lot more technology and science focused. Now he's spread his wings a little bit, which is great. But I tend to be pretty picky there. Um, reading, I try and kind of have one book on the go that's for like fun, just like fiction, and then one book that's more somehow related to growing, like learning, growing, not necessarily like product marketing, anything like that. And then Reddit's a big one for our customer base. Reddit's normally a pretty unfiltered way to do it. And then generally, I also like I'm on LinkedIn a lot anyway, so I absorb a lot of that information. I also try and do like as Charlie Munger said, kind of invert. So typically, whatever the trend is on LinkedIn, I try and be like, actually, what like why are all these people saying this, and what's the opposite of that? Maybe that's the way we should go. Especially around whatever the latest fad is. I find that there's a lot of yeah.
I find it interesting that you bring up Reddit. You're not the first person, and I'll say not the second or third person to bring that up
Mhm.
on a podcast recently. It seems like a lot more people, at least that I've been speaking to, maybe this is something that I've just been relatively oblivious to, but it seems like a lot more people lately have been bringing up Reddit kind of as a place to go answer your questions. Similar how you could always go onto ChatGPT and say, how
Mhm.
do I solve this problem? Or maybe you go into one of those publicly available Slack channels and you say, hey guys, does anyone have any input on these types of issues? But yeah, using Reddit as like a quality place to go figure out who's dealt with this sort of issue before and
Right.
what worked. That's something that I think I need to do a little bit more of myself.
Yeah, specifically on Reddit, like I think the relative anonymity of it gives you an opportunity to, well, it gives people an opportunity to speak a lot more freely. Because if you're
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, it's like tied to your company. If you're on Twitter, there can be an anonymity, but it's like it's generally like the professional ones are who they are. Same with somewhere like Medium or any of those platforms. Whereas Reddit, often you can maybe figure out where someone's working or whatever, but people seem to be willing to speak a lot more freely and a lot more honestly, which is I think the piece that's missing from a lot of the other platforms. And
Yeah,
then on the extreme end, you got LinkedIn where it's like people are just making stuff up. But
yeah,
yeah.
get rid of all that BS and get someone's
Right.
honest opinion. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really good. Okay, so I want to know a little bit more about what does your day-to-day work look like as it pertains to kind of like your daily tasks, because
Sure.
VP of growth can kind of be a very overwhelming title, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you have to be doing on a regular basis. But maybe you can give our audience a little bit of an insight as to like what does a typical day look like for you?
Sure. So I'm sure you get this a lot, but the typical day is there is no real typical day. But yeah, I kind of my work breaks down into two major areas. It's like recurring work and project work, or work that's like has a lifespan but then generally ends. The recurring work is mainly around measurement, planning, forecasting, analysis, looking at how the business is doing overall, where our current bottlenecks are, what improvements could we make, things like that. So we have a kind of weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual cadence, which is nothing special. But I lead the planning across the organization for that. So that certainly takes up a fair amount of time. I think it's really also just like I do a lot of the like putting the numbers together myself and sharing them out, which I do intentionally so that I'm always looking at them. So kind of every Monday morning, I log in at what I unlock my computer and I start going through the previous week, and then if that's the first Monday of the new year, I finish off the analytics for the previous month and quarter, and annually is a bit different. And then from there, it's typically Slack messages, emails, responding. And then I normally try and keep it to like 2 or 3 major projects on the go at any time. We're fairly distributed, so often you're waiting a day or a work day to get an answer to something. So typically moving between those 3, and then I work in as much as possible in kind of a traditional product agile sense. So what's the next deliverable? How does that impact the business? How do we do that as quickly as possible and learn? And yeah, go from there. Otherwise, it's meetings, meet with customers. I read every support ticket that comes in. I think that's a really good way to actually, on the learning side, I think that's a really good way to get a sense of the business, at least from a current user point of view. I read every feature request that comes in. But I think part of that too is just my product background more than a marketing background, where I try and get as deep
I would say
into it as
so.
possible.
It sounds like you're just curious about what's going on with the latest updates with the product. But what I will also say
Right.
is I think what you said is kind of, I think a lot of people will relate to it, whether they think about it or not, is that we are always kind of handling our daily tasks that, no matter if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're going to be doing these same things, but then you always
Right.
have, 1, 2, 3 different projects going on in the background as well. And I think, maybe I haven't spent enough time myself thinking about this. Like, how do you balance all of those current tasks that you have to do daily? And when do you find the time, or how do you decide how much time to allocate to those other projects that you're working on, right?
Right.
And I've seen not just in myself, but some colleagues throughout my career where sometimes they're handling those projects too much and their daily tasks fall behind, or vice versa. They're handling the daily tasks too much and their longer term projects are falling behind. And yeah, how do you balance these types of things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say it's like it's taken me a long time to get comfortable with it, or at least be like pragmatic about it. So probably 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to work with someone who was like super into this book by David Allen called Getting Things Done. And he actually became a trainer of getting things done methodology. So I would recommend it to anyone who's like, there's way too much stuff for me to do ever. I could work 150 hours a week and it would never be enough time. But really, it's about like capturing everything, freeing your mind up so that you're not worried about the things you should be doing, and having a system. So that's essentially what I implement. And then I think it's just being comfortable that everything can't be done, right? So that's, I think, a good lesson to learn. And then also, I think part of the way I've always done it is be very honest with people upfront about expectations. So, hey, here's another project. Can you do this? Yep, I can do it. This is where it'll currently fall, i.e., it's going to be a month out. It's going to be next week. It's going to be 2 years time, i.e., never. And being upfront so that you can have those conversations and then really just prioritize all the time. And then I think the other pieces I try and work as transparently as possible. So that's like I work in Jira generally, even though I don't need to. But then that way, anyone in the organization can go and view anything I'm working on and any of the documents linked and kind of tell the
whether it's
story.
Jira, Monday,
Right.
or any of those project management tools. Yeah, just check out my current list and see how busy I am, and let me know if
Right.
you really want me to be the one taking on that next task.
Right. Or just like watch the task if you're interested. And then I don't need to like, you don't need to message me to be like, how are you doing on this? You can
Oh,
just see
yeah,
it and then
true.
see the progress.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
really true.
message me in the context and stuff like that. But I think a lot of it is just like you go from an academic environment, i.e., high school and university in most cases, where there's like every assignment has to be done and there's a specific date for all of it. And then you get to the working world, and as you kind of grow your responsibility, essentially infinite assignments, none of which have a real, well, some of which have a real date, most of which don't have a real date. And then it's really about understanding, how can I best impact the business given the current situation with the situation changing all the time.
Really well said. Okay, so we're going to move on to the final section of the conversation today, and we're moving into what we like to consider the rapid fire round. So we're looking for kind of like short, crisp answers. First kind of thing that comes to your head. The
Sure.
questions are in general a little bit more playful and thought-provoking and a
Hmm.
little less work-related. But I'll start you off with an easy one. You have mentioned a few books already that have been really successful to you, but maybe you can tell us what's the last book that you read?
So I've just finished reading The Great Mental Models Volume 1. So it's really just a guy who looked at kind of a wide variety of mental models. And the first book is around like, how do you think about mental models and build a toolbox so that over time you can add more and more mental models that over time you can learn a lot quicker, but also just have a lot of different ways of looking at problems and solving problems. Yeah, that's my latest book.
Good answer. I'll have to add it to the list.
Mhm.
Okay, next. If there were no boundaries in technology, and I mean like, snap a finger and anything is possible, what would be the one thing that you would want to have fixed for your role as a marketer today?
Yeah, I think it's so when I think of like a customer journey, I think of it like a stock chart where you have the buys and sells, right? And you have big greens and little reds and big reds. And I think of that as like a user's journey across your product over time. And obviously, you want more greens and bigger greens, so that hopefully over time it's like there's a net positive throughout, right? And there's growth. And I think the thing that's really tough is essentially everything you measure is like a proxy for how they actually feel. So it's, do they click more? That's a proxy for like, yep, I enjoyed what I was doing. But it's not really though, right? Because often you don't know the context, you don't know the emotions involved. So I think like from a technology point of view, I would just love to know the actual like, was it positive, was it negative, by how much, and the emotion behind the experience the person's having, so that we could get away from like proxy metrics all over the place and actually just build things people really, really like. And not in like
Mm.
the addictive social media way where it's like, let's just,
Instant
like
gratification type
just
of
push the
way.
dopamine button, but like
Yeah.
actually build like really positive, meaningful products that really help people.
Yeah, that would be really, really good. But to build, yeah, and that's why we're talking like
Right.
if
That's
you
what
could
I
do
was
anything
saying.
with no boundaries in technology, right? Because
Right.
I'm already trying to think like, is there a way that AI could potentially do that? But like maybe in like 6 months to 1 year, 2 years, maybe something like that is possible. But for now, definitely not. Okay, next question. If there was one repetitive task that you could automate out of all the ones that I'm sure you're doing on a regular basis, what would be that one repetitive task that you would, get rid of by automating?
Yeah, so actually I did this kind of the other day. It's not fully automated. But the thing that irritated me the most is like I'm someone who's got like my work calendar, my personal calendar, and then my wife and I's joint calendar, so I don't really mess up. And that
Smart.
like all agreed, right? But things like Calendly work great, but they don't work great for like, hey, I don't really want to give my company access to like all my private data, like all that sort of stuff, and overlapping. So I figured out that with ChatGPT, I'm sure the other LLMs could do it. But if you just screenshot your calendar with everything overlapping, you say, "What's my availability?" It'll do it in written form. So if someone's ever like, "What's your availability?" It's like screenshot, send it off, and you just screenshot it for the hours you want and tell it the time zone. So I would say
Wow.
that is like my my win for probably the year so far. Of this is awesome. I now
What
no
do you?
longer have to like do that painful like
Yeah.
on Monday
Okay,
I
let me
have nine
check.
till
Let me
10.
check number one. Let me check number two. But also,
Yeah,
like, if you were to put in like Calendly or something like that, which can identify where your schedule is filled and where it's not,
yeah,
it's only associated with one calendar, right? It's you can't do it with your
right,
personal
right,
and that
yeah,
shared one you were talking about. So yeah, screenshot. Maybe for the week, maybe for the month. I'm not sure how you did it, but yeah, like, what's
yeah,
my availability for the next month?
yeah,
Screenshot. ChatGPT figured it out.
yeah,
Well done.
yeah, and it's very good at it.
Okay, and the last question. What is one piece of advice that you would give yourself if you were to restart your journey as a marketer today?
So I don't think this will be particularly shocking based on our previous conversation, but it's really get in the weeds of the product, and not just the product, but in the development of the product. So
Mm.
build a relationship, probably starting with your product manager, product person, if that's the type of organization you're in. But then also start building relationships with engineers. And the reason I say that is, I think for me, the every time I've had a very good experience with like the product marketing development scenario, it's because from a marketing point of view, you're involved really early on. So you're understanding the problem, you're understanding the potential solutions, but you're understanding the problem really before it's even been solved. so that by the time it gets solved, you're familiar with it, you know what's happening, and then you hopefully build that relationship to start getting users as early as possible, so that by the time it actually gets back to you as a marketing professional, you've got not just a good understanding of the problem and the solution, but you actually have evidence that it works and it solves the problem. And I think that would be my advice to anyone, is like, don't focus on like the cool things, don't focus on the like shiny objects, like get in the weeds, especially early on, get to the core problems you solve, understand those personas, understand how the team thinks about it, delivering on it, and understand how to make that really impactful by the time you get ready to hand it over to your customers or scale it.
I think that's some really good advice. I think a lot of younger marketers out there could probably learn from that. And I think myself, I totally agree. When I got into the SaaS area, I think it was all about, why is the tool being built in a certain way? Well, let's
Right.
talk to the engineers to figure out why they're building it that way, because the reason they're doing that is to answer some sort of problem or to fix some sort of solution.
Right.
So in order to be able to convey that value, you need to know why it was built and how it was built. And yeah, just getting down to the core of it and speaking to the engineers who are actually doing the work is probably the best way of getting there. So, Alistair, that's gonna bring an end to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining today. We really liked having you. But before we sign off, maybe you can give our listeners just one more kind of background about Scalr. Why don't you give us one more time what's it all about and how can they find you?
Sure. So if you're interested in learning more about Scalr, go to scalr.com. That's scalr.com. As we discussed, don't go if you're not a developer or you're not interested in infrastructure as code, or you don't want to make your development cycle quicker and do it safely and securely. But if you do, check us out. Feel free to sign up. Also, feel free to contact us, message me, and we can make sure you have a good experience or learn about the product.
Awesome. Thanks.
Sure.